Hello, hello, welcome back. Welcome back. We are doing another book review. um, don't normally, I don't know if this will be a normal thing on this channel, just because, this is a film centric channel, but given the relation to what I read, I think that it qualifies to some extent. Um, and I only will probably do this only for books that have relations to film. I'm not just, it's not going to just be me reading books and regardless. And that's normally right now where it seems where I'm at with reading. It's just I'm kind of interested to see the source material for stuff, mainly right now in comics. So I'm just been dipping my toes in that world, and I just decided to do this one and dedicated a few days to reading it. And I just finished it today, and I just want to talk about it for a little bit, kind of again in the same idea, just in a kind of in a bit of a ramble. And that book was All Star Superman. This is my first entry into Superman in terms of comics. I've heard this is one of the more notable comics out there for Superman. And this is the book that I guess visually inspired in some ways James Gunn's Superman. Um, and the relations between the two are very thin because, as we'll get into it, stories are vastly different. The characters are vastly different. So, it's more, I think, to do with just visual representations that they take from this book to translate into James Gunn's vision, or, excuse me, or maybe there's a whole other comic that I'm not aware as to that inspired that movie. Um, but But yeah, this is All Star Superman, and this is the story of Clark Kent, aka Superman, and he is actually dying because he flew too close to the sun, and he has been exposed now to higher levels of solar radiation. So his cells are dying, and he doesn't have long until his body eventually succumbs to all that solar radiation that is packed in his body. So he goes on a wouldn't say really a quest, but does find himself in situations to where he has to reconcile or ultimately make peace with certain things, cut up any loose ends, tie things up, and ultimately that of a story about the impending death, death as it stands, being an inevitable thing, a fixed point in time, and what you choose to do with said time that you have left. Um, and I think that for that as its foundation, and per what I just read, um, there's some interesting things here. It's a longer book compared to the one that I read. My first comic being the Supergirl comic, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. I actually have the book, the hardcover. If you could see it right, or well, you can't because this it's going to be a different format for the video. But I do have the hardcover now of that book, um, and I think that comparatively speaking, I would say that this is probably a better story, probably a better told story. There is a very different feel compared to the Supergirl comic because that comic is more um, narratively focused. It's very much of its story, and each chapter that you follow into it is just progressing in that story. Whereas All Star Superman is much more broad. There is a story that is taking place within each of those issues, but it is something that is being packed on until eventually you get to the end to where it feels more sufficient and it feels more fulfilled. But for a large part of your time, it is Superman doing, going on adventures. There's story about him, uh, being dealing with like the Bizarro Superman, which I heard, I guess, is the first time that he appeared in the comics. Is this specific story? I don't know if that's true or not. Um, Stories involving Lex Luthor, Lois Lane getting powers at one point, Jimmy Olsen, be getting powers at one point, becoming the Doomsday, monsters at one point. It's a story of fun and charm, but also one that also deals with some weighted, issues or weighted, commentary, that about humanity and about life itself and how you choose to live in such time. Um, and it's a pure form of Superman, which is another thing too, and it's probably why it's renowned, because it's not a story that really shows a nuance in the character. It's a character that is as he as you expect him to be. He is just a good-hearted soul. He's someone who is down to earth, you know, down to earth, someone who is always looking to do the right thing, for the right reasons. He's not doing it out of his own selfishness or his own greed or his own ego. He's doing it purely because it's the right thing to do. And that's what, is kind of uh, the base characteristic when it comes to Superman, is that he is a guy who just simply does it because it is the right thing to do. And the time that he has left, he chooses to do both for self fulfillment, but also for the fulfillment of others, to make sure that people around him are going to be safe, and that can the world exist without him? Can the world exist without um, a Superman? Does that is that possible? And it goes into details, and the way that it portrays it. You know, it's it's has this this self-reflective manner to it, which is appropriate because it is about a story about a man inevitably going to die. And you'd expect that to be there. um, but it also goes for it does the thing that I'm kind of noticing with comics, where it it goes for the it goes for big swings. There's at one point where Superman creates a whole universe, literally, just to see if what a world would look like without Superman. And he also gives Lois Lane powers for a day. And then there's all those other things that happen here and there. Two Kryptonians show up on Earth at one point, and they try to dominate. After Superman is absent for a little bit, dealing with the Bizarros. Um, like it's very episodic, is the way I would put it. The way that the story is being handled. It's not like the Supergirl comic where it is through and through that story, and no real side plots, taking place. This is more televised, more episodic in the way that it's telling that story. And I feel, for some reason, I feel as though this has more to offer than the Supergirl comic in some ways, because, and I don't mean to compare the two, because I mean, obviously they're very different comics. Also, Supergirl deals with different issues than the Superman comic does. But just to say, I think that this comic actually, I feel, invites more fun, and invites just more what do you say, like the story itself may not be as um, upfront as the Supergirl comic is, because the Supergirl comic, like I said, is through and through about its narrative. Where this is pretty much like an episodic thing. There's some issues, specifically that Jimmy Olsen one, where it just doesn't really register. It doesn't really register as being a genuine part of that story. You could do without it, um, but a lot of the time things happen, right? And they happen because the writers are looking to have their fun, while also sprinkling in the little hanging, the lingering idea that Superman is going to also be dead soon. And some of the things that happen within the stories, the resolutions that take place, are in service to that lingering plot thread that's hanging on the top. And to some extent, I I would maybe prefer the Supergirl comic, just because I like a more narratively driven, focused type of story. but I also enjoy the charm and the fun that is with the Superman comic. And I feel as though that also there is um, more supplying, like things that do happen here do actually supply that plot thread that is lingering above. Whereas with the Supergirl comic, when things happen there, it feels like we're almost stretching, not necessarily supplying. And I feel like this comic does more supplying than just lingering. Um, and I like how things resolve. It's it puts Supergirl or Superman at a position where he is, because one of the biggest questions that Superman deals with upon his death is, what is the world going to look like without me? Is that possible? Can the world function? And would I be leaving this place to be vulnerable? He's the questions that are legitimate given his powers and all that. And then the ending of the book, we see that in some ways he always will be a part of the earth, and he always will be protecting people, and even like beyond, spoilers, beyond, death, he still is around, now being a part of the sun. He always will be there, to be protecting people. And I like that. And there's a legacy that he also, has, now, because with the scientists that he's always was with throughout that story, with Project, that's the laboratory is called Project, giving them the DNA codes that they've been trying to work on to try to create, you know, uh, a Superman or a clone, because that was a part of one of the side plots, of Project, is that they were in that laboratory, the whole scientist that Superman is with, Dr. Quintum, I think is his name is. He was trying to perfect Superman and try to, have a contingency plan basically if Superman were to die, but he could never perfect it because he can never get his proper DNA code. Superman finally gives that to him, as well as Lane's DNA code, because um, they explain in the book that I guess Superman and Lois can't actually have children together because of how their biology is. But now that he hands the DNA codes, their DNA codes over to Dr. Quintum, the story ends showing you that there will be another Superman now. Project Superman, as they're calling it. And now they have the proper DNA to replicate it and to create the proper clone, merging it also with the human DNA. Essentially, Superman's legacy moves forward with his son, and that's kind of one of the things that Superman also states at one point. Lois Lane, here is our future. Basically, here is the thing that I would love to have given you or love to have had, but I could never give that to you. So here is my way of giving it to you. It's very sweet. And there's a lot of, there's some sweet moments in the book as well. One of my favorite moments in the book is when Superman actually saves a little girl from committing suicide. It it's one of those small bits, that kind of, you know, puts in perspective, the kind of character that we're dealing with here. He's not a character that is, ruthless or arrogant or, naive. He's pure in heart. He's doing things because he just knows that it's the right thing to do, and he was looking to protect people around him. There's a purity there that I really really enjoy upon reading the book, and little moments like that I really like. Um, I really like the moments with Lois and Clark. I think their chemistry was really really great. Um, I really like, just I like that. I like that, giving her powers. It's like giving her that perspective that she never had, and you see how she takes it on. For her, it's getting to be with him now as an equal, not as an adversary. Whereas Lex, when he takes that power, it's more or less for him as an adversary and someone driven by his own selfish needs. You know, but yeah, there's a lot to the book. There's a lot going on in terms of like characters. In terms of just details. There was a lot of stuff going on, little plot threads, little side things here and there that happen. But ultimately, it is a story about the inevitable, about death, and about how someone deals with it, and how somebody uses the time that they have. And for Superman's case, he is using it to reflect, but also to protect. Whereas with Lex, it is only for his own interest. And even upon having those powers, even though he recognizes that in the vein of being Superman, and I had to research this because I didn't realize what Lex was doing at that moment. There's a moment where Lex like kind of comes to the realization about the powers that he has, and um, I think that he may in fact realize that. Uh, I took it as that he was looking at it more like, wow, okay, so Superman's viewpoint on this, you know, he's not far from just being human to some extent, but he is still, the alpha. He is still that on that level, you know. Um, but as far as I read from people who interpret it, people are saying that, oh, it's actually because he looks at the powers and realizes all that he has done is truly for nothing because of now that change of perspective. It it doesn't it, it instills in him a certain value or a certain ideal. I'm not sure if I take it that way personally. I'd see it more as Lex is like, okay, so this is because he starts to like, get senses, because Superman, eventually, if like Superman at some point, he had to like dial in his senses. He can hear pretty much anything around the world. So Lex is starting to absorb all of that, and he's starting to gain a certain perspective from that. And I took it more as like the ego being lifted, not necessarily being diminished. Because he still tries to beat the hell out of Superman or tries to like, one up him at the end, but Superman is Superman and he comes on top. So, but I enjoy it. I also enjoy Lex. I thought I liked the specific Luthor because he is a very straight man. Like the way that they portray him, he's not completely nuanced. He is as he stands. He's an egotistical maniac, really. He's obsessed with Superman, and he has one goal in mind. And really, I love the issue where they tell you about Lex's motivations, why he's almost content for the longest time being in prison until you realize that really he's playing the long game and then he develops powers later on. But for that moment, I really like that when Clark goes to interview him, he's like, I'm good. I've done what I want to do. I have killed Superman. He flew too close to the sun. That was my plan all along, is to get him there. I know that his cells are dying because that's as a result of that. So my work is done, you know, and that's all he ever wanted. It wasn't purely because he'll say that he wanted to do it for other reasons, a world without Superman and all that, which pretty much motivates Superman to figure that out for himself, to kind of, see that for himself. Perhaps that's maybe what motivates him to create that whole other Earth in the first place. But the the idea that this Lex doesn't have a secondary agenda to it, it's just because he just despises Superman and he just doesn't want that person to exist. And he doesn't want it because it interferes with his own ego, and it interferes with um, his own uh, his own preservation, his own necessity for power. He's he's full of himself basically. And that's how unfortunately he chooses to spend his time. And again, I really like that being the whole lingering idea with this book. The idea of what someone does with their time. You know, so I enjoyed this comic. I thought it was a good read. It's a long read. It's about over like nearly 300 pages, but a good read. I would say it's probably better than the Supergirl comic in some ways. But in other ways, depending on how you like your stories to be told to you, you may or may not find the story to be 50-50. Because, like I said, it is more episodic compared to the Supergirl comic, where the Supergirl comic is more of a narratively driven type of approach. But as it stands, just by what I have read, the All Star Superman comic, I think, just has more to offer. It has 12 stories, really like 10, because there's part one, part two, just specific issues. But they all are fun. They're all charming. They have a spirit to them that is investing. So it's a fun read, and it's also a sentimental read to some extent. Given just what the inevitable is. And in that vein, there is some meaning to be deciphered in this specific book, which I think is, which I think is nice, and puts the book in a certain perspective for me. So yeah, those are my thoughts on All Star Superman. Again, this is the book that I guess visually inspired James Gunn's Superman. Not necessarily that it is, as that as I've explained the book. Clearly, narratively has no connections to the James Gunn Superman book, Superman movie. But visually, there are some key, like the key shot of Superman and Krypto, just sitting on the moon. Clearly, that is inspired by this book. So, stuff like that have shaped some visual aspects of that movie. But if you guys have read All Star Superman, let me know your thoughts on All Star Superman. I don't know where I'm going to go next. I might dive into Batman. I've been wanting to get into Batman comics, but I feel like I needed to do some research to kind of see where exactly I need to start, because there's a lot of comics. I know they're all like standalone comics from what I've read, but some, in specific ordering can tell you a specific story of, Batman proper. So I want to make sure that I'm making, making good calls, in the Batman department. I've been told a lot of times. I actually met someone at the library who told me, like, read year one. I might do year one. We'll see. But let me know your thoughts on All Star Superman if you guys have read it in the comment section below. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Like I said, this is probably going to be exclusively for books that are based or inspired in movies. I'm not going to do just any normal book. I'm just going to do just books that are inspiring movies. Yeah. So that will be how we do it. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.